Hey, welcome back to the Noggin Notes podcast. We got a real treat for you today. Two gentlemen and myself, that would make three gentlemen, I suppose, talking about trafficking, human trafficking specifically, and what we can do about it. I think it's a really illuminating conversation. John Malcolm comes to us from Safe Embrace. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before, and a newcomer, Ron Toft, works for Compassion First, and I've known him for several years. And the three of us discuss very openly this problem of human trafficking. So I think you're going to enjoy it, and I hope it spurs you to move to action, because I think that we all have a role to play in the betterment of our societies and helping to move people forward and, frankly, in this case, pull them out of slavery. So hope you enjoy this. Our podcast, as always, is sponsored by Zephyr Wellness. Zephyr has completed its expansion in the Sparks office of Nevada, and we are proud to host multiple clinicians with very disparate and varied talents, including one native Spanish speaker now. We're happy about that. We also host graduate students in their practicum hours, and we're really excited about that because it allows us to see anybody regardless of insurance coverage or ability to pay, and we don't have to turn anybody away because of that. That's pretty cool. Check out zephyrwellness.org for more. And we're also sponsored by Audible. If you go to audibletrial.com/nogginnotes, you can download your free 30-day trial of Audible. And if you're enjoying this type of audio content, which we presume you are because you're listening to us, and you'll probably enjoy the audio content that Audible provides. Audible is an Amazon company. Their reach is far and wide, and is their volume of selection. It's truly unmatched, and we encourage you to go check that out. You can access many, many book titles and different types of audio content. audibletrial.com/nogginnotes, free 30-day trial. Get a free audiobook, cancel anytime, keep the audiobook, and it helps everybody out. It helps enrich and educate your noggin, which is what this podcast plans to do. And that being said, we will launch into this interview, the first one of 2020. I guess it's the first fresh one of 2020 because we had a reboot last week due to the holidays, and we had John King back on. I got to reach out to John and invite him back on again. But enjoy this first fresh podcast of 2020. It's my interview with Ron Toft and John Malcolm about human trafficking. Enjoy. Hey, welcome back to Noggin Notes, and today I have the pleasure, I should say, to interview John Malcolm, again, from Safe Embrace. Hello, John.
Well, how are you doing?
Good. You've been on a couple of times, and hopefully the audience is familiar with you, and if they're not, they can go back and listen to our other podcasts. And we have Ronnie Toft. Hi, Ron.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves beyond just your first names, but this is, it's Trafficking Awareness Month.
Correct. It's Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And it's January of 2020. We just turned the corner into the new year. And I'm going to let you guys explain what all that means. Brief introductions. John works for Safe Embrace. We've talked about Safe Embrace. Safe Embrace is a great clinical partner with Zephyr Wellness, and Ron has worked historically for Compassion First, which does international anti-trafficking efforts, and I'll let you guys take it away from there. You guys have presented before and you've worked together, so this isn't a brand new introduction, and I want to just dive into it, but for now, John, explain why Safe Embrace is doing what it's doing, and what are some of the other community efforts, because you guys aren't the only one. There are others.
No, absolutely, yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know what Safe Embrace is, we're a nonprofit located out of Sparks, Nevada that helps with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and victims of sex and labor trafficking. We provide intervention and prevention services, so emergency shelter, transitional housing, support groups, things like that. My job is trying to prevent the next generation coming up in our community from becoming either a perpetrator of this or even a victim of this through awareness events and education. Right, so for January, we've been partnering up with other agencies such as Awaken, Washoe County Human Services, the Attorney General's Office, to try to bring awareness to an issue that's becoming more and more prevalent in our community.
And Ron, your efforts are not anti-local, but you're with Compassion First, and Compassion First largely does international stuff, as I alluded earlier. Explain some of the differences, maybe.
Yeah, so Compassion First is actually based in Oregon, but they operate in Indonesia, and they I've been doing international work. Again, as you said, not necessarily because there's nothing to do in America in this field. There's more than enough. But simply because what they were drawn to was what I call the supply side of the equation. In other words, this is where, well, let me start with this. They focus specifically on child sexual trafficking. So that's their area of specialty. And that a lot of the girls that they work with come from other countries, specifically in Indonesia. So what they do is try to stop it from that source. So they're basically trying to cut off the supply by helping work with local organizations, specifically law enforcement and the judicial system in those areas, to be prosecuting rather these crimes. And they also have shelters so that when the girls are rescued, they have somewhere safe to go to do everything from their education to their counseling, reintegrating into family and school and society at large, going through their court case and their legal issues that come from this. And so they've been there about 10 years, and they've really done some pretty amazing work in curbing trafficking in that part of the world. In fact, the region where they started, they've seen about a 50% drop in trafficking. So they've had a really big impact in one of the areas of the world where this is it's a real hotspot of child trafficking. So they've been kind of cutting it off at that source.
So pardon me for being cynical, but if you squash 50% of trafficking in one area, doesn't it mean you just kind of, it's like squeezing a balloon, it just moves to some other area? Is it, I mean, it doesn't seem like we're going to get rid of it necessarily.
Yeah, certainly. And I would say that nobody's going to get rid of it, but of course it's something worth fighting for because these are individual lives that are being affected. However, it has a little bit of that balloon effect, but really what the goal is to make this not worth the effort, not worth the risk for the traffickers themselves. And if you can make this very illegal enterprise, if you can put the squeeze on them and make it not worth the risk to make the money off of these girls, then most of them will just stop, as is true with any criminal enterprise. That being said, it's a massive problem, and John and I can get into this. It's one of the biggest criminal enterprises or industries in the world, human trafficking at large.
Yeah, I want to back up just a little bit and define what it is, because I think most of the listening audience is probably like me, where even though I'm in this field, in this profession, where I'm working with mental health and whatnot, on the periphery are these very large issues like homelessness, for example, or trafficking. We could even say substance abuse. It's a very large issue. We think we understand it because we hear about it a lot. But let's define human trafficking for the broader listening audience, and then we'll get into some conversation about how to identify it, and if you're in a profession that may be more or less susceptible to it, or maybe have a little higher chance of contact, we can get into that as well. So who wants to take a crack at definition?
If we had to break it down to something very, very simple for everyone to understand, it's slavery. This is modern day slavery. Really, that's what it is.
So if I'm fat, dumb, and happy in America, and we're the land of the free and the home of the brave and all that stuff, and we look around like, what are you talking about, slavery? We abolished that. What do you mean?
So it's kind of involved, right? So how it's involved now, it's kind of been broken down into two kind of sectors, and Ron can add on to it as well, with sex trafficking and then labor trafficking. So we look at the first one with sex trafficking, right? So that's, for example, forced prostitution, forced sex work, child sex slaves, things like that. The biggest one that's starting to really pop up to a lot is labor trafficking, right? You look at the travel industry, you look at domestic work, you look at farming, agriculture, things like that. So pretty much what you're doing is you're purchasing these people, these victims, and to say too, when Ron can talk about it more, is majority of our victims that we work with are under the age of 18, right?
It's still bizarre to me, and I don't mean to be pedantic or beat the horse, but it's still like we're in America, and don't people voluntarily enter into their own labor agreements? I mean, like let's really pick apart my cynicism here and say, come on, man, like these people want to work. Because I know that's the pushback that I've heard whenever I try to have these conversations, and I'm playing purposely dumb here,
right?
To help really dig into this and help illuminate how bad the problem is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, although I'm no expert on the labor trafficking side of it, the definitions essentially allow for anybody that is forced or coerced or manipulated into any kind of labor and essentially not getting paid for it, or at least not seeing free benefits from it, free will benefits, I should say. So they're being controlled by another entity. They're doing this work against their will, and they're most of the time not seeing anything from it.
How do we identify this? Because it still seems, I'm thinking about my ears 2 or 3 years ago. My ears 2 or 3 years ago would hear this as, well, come on, man. Like, where could this possibly exist in the broad daylight of the United States of America in 2020, where people are compelled to work against their will? That's not something we're familiar with.
Yeah, one of the ways that I've often thought of it and told other people is, as John said, this is absolutely modern-day slavery, and most people fighting this issue will put it that way. But it's a little bit different than what we as Americans think of as slavery in the history of our own country. Because, as you said, when we think of slavery, we think that was, back in the day, we abolished it, and it's gone, and good for us. The problem is it didn't really go away. It just went underground. And so we just didn't see it for a long time. But it continued to thrive underground, and now it's become such a big issue that it's starting to rise up to the surface again. And over the last decade, I would say people are starting to become more and more aware that this is happening, in fact, all over the world, including in America. As I got involved with these issues and I started to learn more about it, the biggest surprise to me was how prolific it is, that it exists everywhere. I mean, we would probably be more willing to believe that this happens in big cities, right? Or in poor countries around the world or wherever. But, I mean, if you follow the news, if you follow the stories, if you follow where this is happening, rural America, pretty much any town of any size has got this issue. Maybe not necessarily in the visible way that you may think of seeing, people being forced to work or being sexually exploited against their will, but even things like the money is being passed through town, or something along the lines of them being transported through town with people helping out with that. I mean, it's a massive industry that, in fact, the experts say that it's just right below the drug trafficking industry as far as number of people and money involved. The latest figures I read was something like it's a $150 billion industry. It's massive. And there's some 25 million people estimated to be in some form of trafficking or another. So it happens everywhere, and it's bigger than you think, but we don't always see it because it's gone underground after it was abolished.
So let's put some labels to it, or at least some parameters and some optics. What does it look like? Like, we live in Reno. Reno's roughly 400,000 people in the greater metro area of Reno, Sparks, and the outlying areas. Where might we see someone working or forced to work against their will that looks to the random public like they're just working a job? What does that look like?
So, for example, let's just look at youth homeless, right? Over 56% of our youth homeless between the ages of 18 and 24 are victims of trafficking, whether it's sex or labor trafficking. So, for example, let's look at, you have your youth homeless couple. One's 20, one's 18, right? Suffer from mental health, substance abuse, right? They're just looking for money just to survive, right? You're putting that fight or flight kind of stance. You have someone that needs work to be done, right? You look at the growth of rural enterprises out with, say, for example, Fernley, right? Agriculture, something like that.
Fernley, for the listening audience, because we are international and we have people listening all over the world. Fernley is about 30 miles east of Reno, and we live in a mountainous area, so it's not a straight shot. You have to wind through some canyons and go over some mountains. So it's fairly removed, even though it's only 26, 30 miles away. But it's a smaller community. It's about 25,000 people. So.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you look at, for example, let's look at a couple, right? They just gave birth to their kid. Their kid just got taken away from CPS because they're homeless and they can't provide a quality of life for a child, right? So they need money to prove that they're going to somehow reunite with their child. Someone comes out to them and says, hey, you want to earn a couple $100? I can help you come out to this farm, pay you straight cash day by day, right? For them, let's go, let's sign up. They get sucked into it, right? They don't get paid. They can become labor, and then they don't leave that farm. And that's stories that happen that I've heard quite a bit with our youth homeless.
So if I'm a skeptic, I just go, well, they didn't have anything before. They don't have anything still. What keeps them working if they're not getting paid?
When it comes to that, then we go kind of into what these traffickers use is a lot that abusers use, right? And it's that power and control, right? They just can't. You get into this fight or flight where you just want to survive, and then you just know that's how you survive. It's just making sure that your abuser is happy. And it's unfortunate, and that's something that we see a lot just because of our victims and our work, how it intersects with human trafficking and domestic violence and sexual assault, is that power and control aspect.